There was a time before the world had names for things, before the mountains had been counted, before the rivers had been given their directions, before the sea understood where it ended and the sky began. There was only the raw material of everything, stone and darkness, and the deep hum of something waiting to become. And into that waiting, the gods were born. Not all at once, not gently. They came the way most necessary things come, without being asked for, without warning, into a world that had no language yet for what they were. The first ones were old, older than memory. The Titans they would be called, the ones who ruled before ruling had a shape. Cronus was their king. He held the world the way a man holds something he is not sure he should keep. He had children, 6 of them, taken from him one by one, because something had told him that one of his children would eventually take from him what he had taken from his own father. He did not know which one, so he took them all, until the last one slipped away, Zeus. And what came after that? The years of war, the generations of conflict between what had been and what was becoming. That story belongs to another night. What matters here is what came at the end of it. The war ended, the old order fell, and 3 brothers stood at the edge of a new world that needed to be divided. Zeus, Poseidon, Hades. 3 brothers, 3 kingdoms, 1 world. They could not agree on who should take what, so they did what people do when agreement is impossible. They left it to chance. They drew lots. 3 pieces, 3 names, 3 fates decided by something smaller than a decision. Zeus drew the sky. Poseidon drew the sea, and the 3rd brother drew what was left, the world beneath, the kingdom of the dead, the place without sunlight, the realm that every living thing would eventually enter, and none would choose to visit. His name was Hades, and this is his story. Not the story you may have heard, the one where he is the villain, the dark god, the one to be feared. That story belongs to a different age, a different telling. This is an older one. This is the story of a god who received what no one wanted and built something quiet and permanent inside it. A god whose kingdom held more souls than all the temples of Olympus combined. A god whose name the living avoided speaking, not because he was evil, but because he was inevitable. Settle in. The night is long, and the story moves slowly. That is exactly how it should be told. To understand Hades, you have to understand what came before him. Not the details, the feeling of it. For years beyond counting, the old gods held the world. The Titans were enormous in the way that first things are enormous, not because of size, but because nothing existed yet to compare them to. They were the measure of everything. The sky moved because they said it moved. The earth was still because they decided it should be. And Cronus ruled them all. He was not cruel in the way cruelty is usually described. He was careful, methodical. He had heard what his own father had whispered at the moment of defeat, that one day a child would rise and take from him what he had taken. And Cronus, being the kind of god who believed in solving problems before they became problems, decided to remove the possibility entirely. One by one, he swallowed his children. Hestia first, then Demeter, then Hera, then Hades, then Poseidon. Each one disappeared into the dark of their father's body, where they did not die, gods cannot die, but waited in a kind of stillness that had no name, a stillness that Hades would come to understand, in a different way, for the rest of his existence. The sixth child escaped. You already know his name. And what followed, the 10 years of war, the slow unraveling of the old order, the moment when Cronus was finally forced to return what he had taken, all of that is its own story. What matters here is the moment after. The war was over. The Titans were bound in Tartarus, the deep place beneath even the Underworld, where punishment has no end and no visitor. The sky was clean, the world was new, and 3 brothers stood together for the first time in their full power, looking at everything that existed and asking the only question that remained: who takes what? Zeus was the one who had fought longest, who had organized the resistance, who had freed his brothers and sisters from their father's body, who had led the war to its end. There are those who say he deserved first choice. Perhaps he did. Poseidon was the middle brother, steady and vast, with a nature as deep and unpredictable as the water that would become his domain. And Hades was the oldest, the first to be swallowed, the first to know that stillness, the one who had spent more time inside that particular darkness than either of his brothers. Perhaps that was why what happened next felt, to those who watched it, like the most natural thing in the world. They drew lots. 3 objects, 3 names written or spoken or held in the mind the way divine things are held. Chance was invited in, and chance answered. Zeus drew the sky. Poseidon drew the sea. Hades drew what was left. There is no record of what his face showed in that moment. The old poets did not write it down, or if they did, those words have not survived. What we know is what he did next. He accepted it, not with bitterness, or if there was bitterness, it did not last long enough to become part of the story. He took what the lot had given him, and he went down, beneath the earth, beneath the roots of mountains, beneath the place where the living walk and the water runs and the seasons turn, down to where the light had never reached and where it would never reach and where it was not needed. He went down and he stayed. And if there is something in that act, something in the quiet acceptance of a kingdom no one else wanted, that feels familiar to you, that feels like something you have known in a smaller way, in a different kind of room, on a different kind of night, then you already understand more about Hades than most of the stories will ever tell you. He took what was given, and he made it his. The first thing you notice when you try to picture the underworld is what is missing. There is no wind. Not the absence of breeze, the complete absence of movement in the air. The kind of stillness that has never been disturbed, that predates disturbance, that exists in the space beneath the roots of things where no breath has ever wandered. The air is there, you can breathe it, but it does not move. The second thing is the light. There is some, not sunlight, nothing so direct, nothing so alive. A pale luminescence that seems to come from the stones themselves, from the pale grass of the fields, from something in the distance that you can never quite locate. Enough to see by, enough to know where you are, but not enough to cast a shadow, and that is the strangest part. A world where shapes exist, but nothing casts a shadow on the ground. This is what Hades walked into. And the first thing he had to cross was the water. There are 5 rivers in the underworld, and each one carries a different kind of forgetting. The Styx is the most famous. You have heard its name. It is the river of hatred, though that translation is not quite right. It is more the river of the oath, the one the gods swear by when a promise must be absolute. Its water is black, not because it is corrupted, but because it is old, older than color. The Styx was there before there was a word for darkness. Charon waits at its edge. He has always waited there. No one knows exactly when he arrived, or whether he was ever not there. He is old in the way the river is old, not aged, but prior. He does not speak unless he has to. He does not look at the souls he carries in the way a person looks at a person. He looks at them the way a ferryman looks at cargo, present, accounted for, requiring safe passage. He requires payment, a coin, placed in the mouth or on the eye. This is why the Greeks buried their dead with coins, not superstition, not decoration, but practicality. A passage must be paid for. That was understood. The souls who could not pay waited at the bank. They waited for 100 years before Charon would take them across without payment. 100 years standing at the edge of a river that never changes, watching the water that does not reflect. If this sounds cruel, consider that the Greeks did not intend it as cruelty. It was simply the rule. Rules in the underworld had a weight that rules above could never quite achieve. Down here, there were no exceptions. On the far side of the Styx, the path opens. It leads through the asphodel fields. This is where most of the dead go. Not the heroes, not the condemned, the ordinary ones. The people who lived their lives, made their choices, loved the people they loved, and quarreled with the people they quarreled with, and died at the end of it the way everyone dies, without grand significance, without catastrophe, simply arriving at the end of the road and stepping off. The asphodel is a pale flower, long-stemmed, white, with a center that is almost gray. It grows everywhere here, as far as you can see in any direction, nodding slightly in a wind that does not exist. The souls move through it quietly. They do not remember here. The waters of Lethe, another of the 5 rivers, take care of that. What remains is not unhappiness. What remains is something closer to the color of an old afternoon, familiar in texture, empty of detail. It is not suffering, it is not joy. It is simply where most things end up. Hades ruled it all. He walked these fields. He knew the sound the pale grass made under his feet, if there is a sound, which is uncertain. He knew the weight of this kingdom, its dimensions, its logic. He understood it in the way that only someone who has inhabited a place for a very long time can understand it, not by studying it, but by becoming the person it made him. There were other places too. Elysium for the heroes and the favored, a place where the light is warmer, where the wind does return, where the souls of the great and the good live in something that resembles what they loved in life. Athletes run on the fields there. Poets speak. The things that mattered above still matter here, in a quieter key. And then Tartarus, deep beneath even the underworld, deeper than Hades' own kingdom, the way a pit is deeper than a floor. This is where the Titans were bound after the war. This is where the truly condemned go. Not the ones who made ordinary mistakes. Not the ones who simply arrived at the end of their lives, but the ones whose crimes were so particular, so deliberate, so aimed at the divine order itself that something other than ordinary dying was required. Sisyphus with his stone, Tantalus with his water and his fruit, Ixion on his wheel. They are not there because Hades is cruel. They are there because the order of things requires consequence. Hades did not invent that requirement. He simply enforced it, with the quiet consistency of someone who believes in the rules because the rules are all that hold the world in its shape. And standing over all of it, at the entrance, never sleeping, never resting, his three heads turning in different directions at once, was Cerberus. He is described in different ways by different poets. Three heads always, a serpent's tail sometimes, a mane of serpents in certain versions. What remains consistent is his purpose, not to keep the living out, but to keep the dead in. He is not a monster in the way the word usually works. He is a guard. He is loyal. He is, in his way, the most faithful creature in any mythology. Stationed at the end of everything, unwilling to move, incapable of betrayal. Hades built this place. He did not build it in the way you build a house, choosing the materials, placing the walls. He built it by inhabiting it, by deciding what it was for, by deciding, quietly and without ceremony, what it meant. And in the silence of all that pale light, in the fields that stretched in every direction without a horizon, he remained. The other gods had temples. Zeus had dozens, in Athens, in Olympia, in cities whose names have since been forgotten. People came to his temples with requests, with arguments, with animals for sacrifice. His name was spoken every day, in prayers and in curses, and in the ordinary language of a world that considered him present. Poseidon had his temples too. Sailors visited them before voyages. Fishermen left offerings at the shore. His name was in the sound of the sea, familiar and close, a presence that moved through everyday life the way weather moves, unpredictable but constant. Hades had almost none. Not because the people disliked him, not because he had done anything wrong. It was simply that the Greeks found it difficult to speak his name. Not forbidden, just uncomfortable. Like talking too directly about a thing that everyone knows will happen and that no one wants to bring to the front of the mind before it has to be. So they used other names. The most common was Pluton. It means the rich one. This is not an insult. It is not sarcasm. It is actually a careful piece of theological thinking if you sit with it. Everything of value that comes from beneath the earth, every vein of gold, every deposit of silver, every precious stone pulled from the rock, belongs, in a sense, to the kingdom below. It passes through the earth on its way to human hands. The earth gives it up, and the earth, in this way of thinking, is the surface of Hades' kingdom. He is the richest of the gods, not because he has accumulated wealth, but because wealth begins in his territory. He is the source, not the hoarder. And there is something else beneath the ground, of course. Seeds. Every seed that a farmer plants passes through the dark before it becomes light. It goes down into the earth, into Hades' kingdom, and it rests there in the cold and the quiet, and then, not by force, not by command, but by its own nature, it rises. Even the harvest, in this way, moves through him. But temples remained rare, prayers remained few, and Hades remained, by the standard of Olympian politics, largely alone. He did not visit the other gods often. The stories do not show him at the great feasts on Olympus, debating and laughing and competing the way Zeus and Athena and Apollo competed. He is present in the architecture of the myth, essential, immovable, the lord of 1/3 of everything. But he sits outside the social world of the gods in a way that is not quite exile and not quite choice. It is more like inclination. He was not made for the noise. He was made for the permanence. And his court, such as it was, reflected this. He had judges, 3 of them, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. Once kings, now tasked with weighing the lives of the dead and deciding where each soul belonged. They did not take requests. They did not accept gifts. They looked at what a life had been, and they made their judgment, and the judgment held. This was, in the ancient world, a remarkable thing. The Greeks knew, as people have always known, that justice in the living world is imperfect. Wealth buys outcome. Power redirects consequence. The guilty walk away sometimes, and the innocent do not. This was not a secret. It was simply how the world worked. But in Hades' kingdom, there was no escape from what you had done. Not because he was vengeful, not because he enjoyed punishment, but because the structure of his realm was built on a principle that the living world could only approximate, that what you are is what you are, and the end of life is the moment when everything that protected you from that truth falls away. Some people find this frightening, others find it restful. The idea that a place exists where pretense is no longer possible, where the gap between the person you appeared to be and the person you actually were finally closes, where the accounting is real. Hades did not create this principle. He enforced it, with patience, without emotion, as consistently as the river runs and the pale grass grows. This is the God the Greeks could not quite bring themselves to pray to. Not the villain, not the monster, not the one who takes things from you in the night. The one who simply holds what cannot be held anywhere else. The one who keeps the permanent record. The one who waits at the end of every road with the same steady expression, not welcome, not warning, simply presence. If you are someone who finds beauty in quiet places and forgotten things, in the patience of deep water, in the persistence of roots in the dark, this is a channel that was made for you. For a very long time, nothing changed. That is the part of the story that rarely gets told, because stories prefer movement, arrival, departure, transformation. But before the transformation, there was the stillness. Hades ruled. The dead came. The judges judged. The rivers ran their ancient courses. Cerberus stood at the gate. And the pale fields continued as they had always continued, in every direction, without end. This is what the kingdom was before the day it changed. The change arrived, as changes often do, from above. She was gathering flowers. Her name was Persephone, and she was the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, of grain, of the green world above. She was young, in the way gods are young, which means something different from youth as the living experience it. Not naive, not fragile, simply not yet shaped by the weight of a particular thing. The field where she was gathering flowers was bright. Sicily, some say. A meadow where the narcissus grew, golden and sweet, nodding in a real wind, the kind of wind that exists in the upper world, full of pollen and direction. And then the ground opened. This is the moment the older versions of the story describe as a taking, an abduction. Hades reaching up from below and drawing her down. The later versions are more complicated. Some say Zeus arranged it, that Demeter would never have agreed, her daughter, her only child, sent into the kingdom below, and so Zeus, who had a habit of deciding things without asking the people most affected by them, arranged it without telling her. Some say Persephone saw the narcissus, the one flower she had not yet picked, and reached for it. And the earth opened not as an attack, but as an invitation. What we know is that she went down, and the kingdom received her. What happened in those first hours or days is not recorded in the way the Greeks recorded things they could see and verify. What we know is the shape of the outcome. Hades, who had ruled alone for as long as there had been an underworld to rule, found himself sharing it. There is a version of this story that wants Persephone to be only a victim, a girl taken from the light, kept in the dark, unhappy and waiting. This version has its reasons. It maps onto a certain kind of fear, the fear of being taken from the place where you belong, of losing your world without warning or consent. But the Greeks told another version too. In that version, Hades is a different kind of figure. Quiet, yes. Alone, yes. A god who had received a kingdom no one else wanted and had made it into something ordered and fair and permanent. A god who had never asked for something that belonged to someone else. A god who had, by the standards of Olympus, been remarkably restrained. And now, for the first time in his existence, he wanted something. Not the harvest, not the sky, not power. Something smaller. Something that the other gods, busy with their temples and their wars and their endless human entanglements, had never thought to offer him. Company. Persephone did not find a monster waiting for her. She found a kingdom. Dark, yes. Still, yes. Without wind and without sunlight, and without the particular sweetness of the upper world's air. But ordered, organized, presided over by someone who had thought carefully about what fairness required and had built his entire existence around delivering it. And she was its queen, not a guest, not a prisoner, not a decoration, the queen. She sat beside him at whatever throne the underworld had. She learned the rivers, the fields, the logic of the place. She met the souls who drifted through the asphodel. She understood, gradually, what Hades had understood for much longer, that this kingdom, which looked like an ending, was actually the shape of something complete. Nothing was missing here. It was simply a different kind of full. There are small details in the ancient texts that feel, when you read them slowly, like windows into something true. Hades gives Persephone a pomegranate, or she finds one, depending on the version, or she takes one. But she eats the seeds, 6 of them in most accounts, and this eating, this small, deliberate act, becomes the axis around which the rest of the story turns. We will come to that. For now, what matters is the shape of the kingdom in those months when Persephone was there. The dead still came. The judges still judged. Cerberus still stood at the gate. But something had shifted in the atmosphere of the place. Not dramatically, not in a way that would register in the fields of asphodel or in the black current of the Styx. Just that the god who had always sat alone was no longer sitting alone. And there is something in that, in the image of two figures in the quiet below, one who had built the permanent and one who had come from the living world, that resists being called simple, resists being filed under tragedy or captivity or any of the tidy categories we reach for when a story doesn't resolve the way we expected. Hades had not become softer. He was still what he had always been, impartial, patient, the steady keeper of what could not be kept anywhere else. But the kingdom had a queen now, and the silence, which had been absolute, had one other voice in it. This was the change. Above the ground, everything stopped growing. Demeter noticed her daughter was gone, the way a mother notices, not gradually, not with the slow accumulation of evidence, but all at once. One moment the world had her daughter in it, the next moment it did not. And the world, which had been ordered around that fact, stopped making sense. She searched. This is what the old texts say, and it is one of the most human things they say about any god. She did not sit in a temple and wait for information. She walked. She asked. She went from city to city, town to town, carrying a torch in each hand, one version says, searching the living world for the one who was no longer in it. No one could tell her. The nymphs who had been in the field said nothing. The wind, which had been there, said nothing. The earth, which had opened, said nothing. And Demeter walked on, through the days and then the weeks, with the particular silence of a mother whose grief has moved past the stage of breaking and into the stage of becoming permanent. And as she walked, she forgot what she was. Not her name, not herself, but the work she was made for. She was the goddess of grain, of harvest, of the turning year. The seeds in the earth required her attention. The green required her presence. The crops that fed every human city, every village, every household that set bread on the table, all of that ran on her care, the way a machine runs on the hand that tends it. She stopped tending. The first signs were small. A field that produced less than it should. A harvest that came late, thin, uncertain. Farmers who shook their heads and spoke of strange weather, of something changed in the air that they could not name, but could feel in the way their animals moved and their seeds failed to rise. Then it became undeniable. The green withdrew from the fields. The trees let go of their leaves, not in the gentle, seasonal way that felt like part of a rhythm, but in a sudden, blanket way that felt like resignation. The ground hardened. The sky became the color of old stone. And the cold arrived. A cold that had no precedent, that had never come before in the memory of any living thing, because there had never been a winter before. This was the first one. Imagine what it must have been like to live through a winter without knowing what winter was, without the word for it, without the understanding that the cold would end, that the green would return, that this was a season and not a condition. The humans did not know it would pass. They only knew that the world had gone strange, that the earth refused to give, that the warmth they had always counted on was simply gone. Have you ever waited for something you knew would return and still felt the full weight of its absence? Have you ever lived through a season whose ending you believed in, but could not quite feel from where you stood? That is what the first winter was. Not just cold, not just darkness. The weight of waiting for something that had no guaranteed return. The gods on Olympus watched. They ate because gods eat differently than humans. They do not depend on harvests for survival. But they watched the world below thin and quiet and grow pale. And the watching was uncomfortable. A world that does not grow is a world that does not pray. And gods are sustained in their way by attention. Zeus acted. He sent Hermes. This was the only possible messenger. Hermes was the one god who moved freely between the worlds, above and below, living and dead, Olympus and the kingdom beneath. He was quick, trusted with difficult messages, capable of traveling the full distance without being stopped. Hermes went down. He delivered the message to Hades. Persephone must be allowed to return. The world above was dying. The humans were suffering. The order of things, which Hades understood better than anyone, required that she go back to the light. Hades listened, and then he did something that no god, reading the logic of the moment, could have predicted. He agreed, without argument, without negotiation, without the threat of force that Zeus had presumably prepared to deliver if words were not enough. He simply said, "Yes, she may return." He did not say it easily. This much you can guess from the version that follows, from the seeds of the pomegranate that had already been eaten, from the arrangement that would be made and would hold for as long as the world continued. But he said it, and Persephone began to move toward the light. Above, the frozen ground felt something change in it, something small, like a single thread being pulled at the edge of a very large fabric. Not warmth yet, not spring, just the first suggestion of a direction. Demeter, still searching, felt it too. She stopped walking. She lifted her face in the direction of something she could not name, but recognized. The way you recognize the sound of a familiar voice before you have processed the individual words. Her daughter was coming back. Before she could leave, there was the matter of the seeds, 6 of them. She had eaten them while she was in the underworld, the seeds of a pomegranate, red and small, the kind of thing that seems entirely inconsequential until it turns out to be the hinge on which everything else turns. The rule was old, older than Hades, older than the division of the world into sky and sea and below. The rule simply said, if you eat the food of the dead, you belong, in part, to their world. Not fully, not forever, but in part and permanently. 6 seeds, 6 months. The negotiation that followed is not recorded in detail, because negotiations between gods rarely are. What emerges from the older texts is the shape of the outcome, and the outcome had a logic to it that everyone, Demeter, Zeus, Hades, and Persephone herself, could accept, even if accepting it meant accepting something they had not chosen. 6 months below, 6 months above. Half a year in the kingdom of Hades, where she had learned the rivers and the fields and the quiet logic of a place that was not what it appeared to be. Half a year in the upper world, where her mother waited, where the light moved differently, where the air had weight and direction. And when she returned below, Demeter's grief would return with her, not as punishment, not as cruelty, simply as the honest expression of a mother's love, which cannot be hidden or redirected, which moves through Demeter the way weather moves through the world, not because she chooses it, but because that is what she is made of. The earth would go cold, the green would pull back, the light would thin, and when Persephone returned above, the world would wake. This is what the Greeks called the seasons, not a mechanical process, not simply the tilt of the earth or the distance from the sun, but a story, a real ongoing story happening every year in which a mother and daughter are separated and reunited, and the world reflects their grief and their joy with a faithfulness that no metaphor can fully capture, because it is not a metaphor, it is the actual reason. This is one of the things that makes the story difficult to reduce to lesson or allegory. The Greeks did not say, "This is a myth that explains the seasons." They said, "This is what the seasons are." The story is not the explanation. The story is the thing. Persephone understood this. There is a version of her, in later readings, that is only a victim, taken, returned, cycling between two worlds without choice or agency. And there is grief in that reading, real grief, the grief of someone whose life was divided by a decision made above her. But there is another version, a version in which the queen of the underworld knows exactly who she is, who walks beside Hades with the authority of someone who was not given her title but earned it by surviving the descent, by learning the kingdom, by becoming the one figure in the ancient world who moved freely between the living and the dead. She was the only one. Even Hermes, the messenger, was a visitor. He passed through, he delivered and returned. But Persephone belonged to both, not as a compromise, not as a solution to a problem, but as a fact. She was the daughter of the harvest and the queen of what the harvest came from. She was the spring above and the permanence below. 6 seeds, not a tragedy, not a punishment, not a mistake. A door left slightly open in both directions. The world had its seasons now, and the seasons had a story, and the story had no ending, only a return. And so she left. Every year, at the moment the world above tips back toward warmth, when the light begins to stay a little longer each day, when the first green things push through the ground with the particular urgency of something that has been waiting, Persephone returns to her mother. The underworld does not change when she goes. The pale fields continue. The Styx runs its ancient course. Cerberus holds his post. The dead arrive, as they always arrive, in the quiet and continuous way that everything inevitable arrives, without announcement, without ceremony, simply appearing at the bank of the river and waiting for the crossing. Hades remains. He always remains. This is, when you think about it, the truest thing about him. Not the taking, not the darkness, not the association with endings that the later stories preferred. The truest thing is the remaining. While the upper world spins through its seasons, spring into summer, into the grief of autumn, into the cold that Demeter cannot stop herself from making, Hades is still. He does not change with the weather, because weather does not reach him. He does not mark the seasons by what grows, because nothing here grows or recedes in that way. He marks the seasons by her absence. 6 months of the year, the kingdom has a queen. The quiet has 2 shapes in it, his, which is old and permanent and made of long practice, and hers, which is something different, something that arrived from above and learned to fit the dark without losing what it was before. And then she goes. And the remaining 6 months, the kingdom has 1 shape in it again. This is the patience of Hades. Not the patience of someone waiting for something to change. Not the patience of endurance, of suffering through until the thing you want finally arrives. It is a different kind, the patience of someone who understands cycles, who knows that the return is built into the leaving, who has learned to hold the absence the same way he holds everything else in this kingdom, steadily, without drama, as a fact of the structure. There is no record of what Hades does in those 6 months. The old poets did not write him in summer. He does not appear in the stories of harvest and light, and the warm world doing what it does when Persephone is in it. He is simply not there, which is another way of saying that he is exactly where he has always been, below, still, waiting in the way that only becomes visible in winter, when the world above goes quiet and cold, and something in that silence rhymes, at a distance, with the silence below. He is not unhappy. This is important to say, because the stories have often implied otherwise, have drawn him as diminished by the absence, as the lonelier half of an uneven arrangement. But Hades was not made for the light. He was made for the permanence. And permanence does not grieve itself. It simply holds. The kingdom remains. The rivers run. The pale fields extend in every direction without a horizon. And somewhere in the turning year, in the exact moment when the warmth breaks and the first leaf falls, and Demeter's grief begins its slow return, a door opens in the ground, and the queen comes home. There are other stories like this one, gods who received what no one wanted and found something unexpected inside the silence. One of them comes next. The kingdom is quiet now. It is always quiet. That is the nature of the place. Not the quiet of something that has gone wrong, not the quiet of absence, but the quiet of something that has found its shape and settled into it, the way deep water settles, the way a very old stone is still. Hades is there. The rivers are there, the Styx in its ancient black, the Lethe carrying its particular kind of forgetting. the others moving in their slow, purposeful way through the dark. The pale fields extend. The asphodel nods in a wind that is not a wind. The souls of the ordinary and the extraordinary drift through the same meadow, neither remembered nor forgotten, simply present. And somewhere above, the world is turning. You are part of that world, the one with weather and sound and the particular weight of being alive, the one that keeps moving even when you are still, the one that will be there in the morning. For now, let it turn without you. Let the story settle the way stories settle, not into a lesson, not into a conclusion, but into a feeling. The feeling of a kingdom that holds what it holds, quietly, without asking anything of you. This is one of the stories we are walking through together, one night at a time. Rest now. The water is running, the fields are still, and the dark down here is very gentle.